My son-in-law was cleaning the kitchen on a Sunday morning, which sounds like a virtuous act, and it was not an entirely unvirtuous one. The kitchen did need cleaning, and Derek was not a man who often cleaned anything, so there was something in the thing gesture. The problem was the specific way he cleaned, which was the way of a man who categorizes things into useful and useless in approximately 3 seconds, and who deposits the useless into the trash with the same ease of someone who has never owned anything that he would regret losing. The honey jar was on the back of the pantry shelf. It had been on the back of the pantry shelf since I moved into Diane's house in 2019, when my own apartment had been given up after my hip surgery, and it had been on the back of a shelf in various kitchens since 2001, which is when I had sealed it and placed the label on the lid that said, in my handwriting, Wildflower Honey, 2001, do not use. I had placed the label there because the jar was not for use, and I did not want it used, and the label had been sufficient across the 22 years it had existed without being questioned. "What is this?" Derek said, coming into the living room with the jar. He held it at arm's length, which is the way people hold things they have decided are suspect. "Honey," I said. "From 2001, put it back." "It's 20 years old," he said. 22, I said. "It's still good. Honey doesn't expire. Put it back. It's crystallized and dark," he said. "This is stale. This is taking up space for no reason. I'm getting rid of it." He turned toward the kitchen. "Derek," I said. I said it in the voice I use when I mean stop, which is not a loud voice but a specific one. "Put the jar back on the shelf. I'm not asking." He stopped. He turned. He looked at me with the expression of a man who has been told to do something he finds unreasonable by a woman he has decided he does not need to take seriously. His mother-in-law, 67 years old, recovering from hip surgery, living in his house because her daughter is his wife, and because her daughter would not permit anything else. "Mom," he said. The word mom delivered as a correction rather than an address. "This is my house. I'm cleaning my kitchen. I'm getting rid of junk that doesn't belong here." He turned again toward the kitchen. I was on my feet with the cane before I had fully decided to stand. I am faster on my feet than Derek expects, which is consistent with his general assessment of me. He expects me to be slower than I am in most respects, which is a consistent error. I was in the kitchen doorway before he reached the sink. "Give me the jar," I said. He looked at me with the specific expression of a man who has made a calculation and arrived at the conclusion that the calculation favors him. "You can't be serious. Give me the jar, Derek, right now." There was a moment, the kind of moment that happens in households where power is contested, and that is resolved by whoever is more certain of their position. I was more certain of mine. He gave me the jar. "Thank you," I said. I took the jar to my room. I sat on my bed with the jar in my hands, and I held it for a while, and I breathed until the specific adrenaline of the confrontation had settled. And then I opened my sewing box, and I put the jar in the bottom of it, under the spools of thread, and the pin cushion and the scissors, and I closed the lid. Later, after Derek had left for his golf game and Diane was in the garden and the house was quiet, I opened the sewing box and I took out the jar and I held it up to the window light. At the bottom of the honey, thick and dark and crystallized, the honey of 22 years of uninterrupted stillness. The shapes were there, not visible to anyone who did not know what to look for, visible to me immediately and without effort, as they had been in 1996 when I first encountered them, and understood what I was encountering. My name is Ruth Miriam Goldstein Auerbach. I am 67 years old. I was a gemologist for 35 years, certified by the Gemological Institute of America, employed by 3 jewelry firms over the course of my career, and then the owner of my own small workshop from 2009 to 2019 when I sold it to retire. I know what rough diamonds look like through honey in a jar from 2001, and I know what they are worth, and I know that what Derek had almost poured down the drain was something that required the same response from me that it has always required: protection, patience, and the right moment. The right moment had arrived. I want to tell you the story of the diamonds before I tell you what I did with them. Because the diamonds have a story, and the story matters to understanding what they are. I had been working as a gemologist at a jewelry firm in Chicago in 1996, the middle years of my career, when I was 40 and had 17 years of experience, and the specific confidence of someone who has done something long enough to know what she knows, and knows that what she knows is substantial. The firm was a mid-sized establishment that specialized in estate jewelry and custom work, and my role was primarily in the assessment and certification of gemstones, the evaluation of what a stone was, what its quality was, and what it was worth. An estate came through the firm in the spring of 1996, the estate of a woman who had died at 93, the descendant of a family that had come to Chicago from Eastern Europe in the early 20th century, and that had brought with them in the way of families that understood what was happening to them and why as many portable valuables as could be carried. The woman herself had lived very modestly. Her apartment, when the estate executor brought her effects to the firm, was spare in the way of someone for whom material comfort had never been the point. But she had kept things. The things she had kept were, in their way, the record of everything her family had carried and survived. Among her effects was a collection of rough stones, uncut, unpolished diamonds in their natural form, the way they come out of the ground before the cutter's work transforms them into the things that appear in engagement rings and necklaces. There were 9 of them, ranging in size from approximately half a carat to what I estimated, in my first assessment, at slightly over 3 carats. They had been wrapped in cloth and placed in a small tin, and the tin had been at the bottom of a box of old correspondence. The executor wanted them assessed and certified. I assessed them. What I found across 3 days of evaluation was 9 rough diamonds of genuinely significant quality, not the clarity grades of fine gem diamonds, which rough stones do not carry in the same way, but the specific combination of size, color, potential, and structural integrity that tells an experienced gemologist that these stones, once cut, would produce gems of real value. I wrote the certification report. I gave the executor the assessment, which placed the collection's total value in uncut form, sold to a dealer, at a range that was substantially above what the executor had expected. The estate was a small one. This collection was its most significant asset. 3 weeks later, the executor returned to the firm with the collection and told me that the estate had decided not to sell. The woman's daughter, still living, had seen the stones and had recognized them, had said that she knew where they had come from, that they had been carried from Poland by her grandmother in 1939, that the grandmother had sewn them into a coat, meaning that the coat had arrived in Chicago with the family. The daughter did not want to sell them. She wanted to keep them. But the daughter had no safe place to keep them. She was living in a care facility, and her room could not securely hold anything of value. She asked if I knew of a way to keep them safe without a bank vault, which was expensive, and without leaving them in a facility where they might be lost. I told her I had an idea. She gave me the stones. I took them home, and I put them in the bottom of a mason jar. I poured honey over them, good wildflower honey from a beekeeper I knew in Wisconsin, until they were submerged, and the honey covered them completely. I sealed the jar, and I labeled it, and I put it on my shelf. The woman's daughter died the following year in 1997. She had no heirs. The stones, entrusted to me informally and without legal documentation, became mine in the specific sense that things become yours when the person who gave them to you is gone, and no one else knows they exist. I kept them. I kept them because I had promised, and because the keeping was the right thing, and because I was a gemologist who understood their value, and who understood that value of this kind requires patience rather than immediacy. I moved the jar from apartment to apartment, and eventually to the workshop, and eventually back to an apartment, and eventually, after the hip surgery, to Diane's house. For 27 years I had been keeping a family's carrying across a war. My daughter Diane is 41 years old. She married Derek Forsyth in 2010 when she was 26, and she spent 12 years in a marriage that was the subject of the most sustained and careful watching I have done since I spent 6 months studying a particular collection of sapphires in 1988 to understand their true color range. I watched because watching is what I do. It is the skill set of a gemologist who must see what is actually in front of her rather than what is reported to be in front of her, and it is the skill set of a mother who watches her child in the same way. Derek was not violent. I want to say this precisely because precision matters. He was not violent in the ways that are visible and documentable, and that produce the legal and social responses that violence produces. He was the other kind, the kind who manages rather than strikes, the kind whose control is expressed through dismissal and contempt in the systematic communication, day by day and year by year, that the person beside him is insufficient. He did this to Diane. He did it to the honey jar, which he assessed in 3 seconds as stale and useless. The honey jar assessment was the honey jar, but it was also the way he assessed everything around him. Everything that did not immediately communicate its value in terms he recognized. I had watched him do this to Diane for 12 years. I had watched her become, over 12 years, a different woman from the one she had been at 26. Not worse, not broken, but thinner in some quality I cannot precisely name. The specific thinning of a person who has been told for 12 years that what she sees and thinks and values is insufficient. I had said things to Diane across the 12 years that were the things you say to a daughter you are watching in a situation you cannot fix on her behalf. I had not pressed too hard, because pressing too hard is its own form of not seeing clearly. You cannot see clearly what someone needs if you have decided in advance what they need and are waiting for them to need it. I had pressed enough, and I had waited, and I had continued to watch. In 2021, Diane told me she was thinking about leaving. She said it sideways, in the way that people who have spent a long time in a situation say things about the situation before they are ready to say them directly. I had received the sideways statement, and I had said, "Whatever you need, I'm here." In 2022, she filed for divorce. Derek had not expected it. He had not seen it coming because he had not been watching Diane the way I had been watching her. And what he had not been watching was the specific accumulation of clarity that people develop when they have been seen, clearly by at least one person in their life. I had been watching. I had been telling Diane, in every way available to me, that what she saw and thought and valued was real and sufficient in hers. The divorce was completed in 2020. Derek left the house, which was Diane's by the settlement. I remained, which was appropriate, and which Derek had not been in a position to prevent because the house was Diane's. Diane had begun, in the months after the divorce was final, to be the person she had been at 26 again. Not identical. 26 was 41, is 41, and the years between produce real changes. But recognizable. The specific quality of a person who is being seen clearly again was returning, the way light returns to a room when the thing that was blocking it is moved. And she had met someone, a man named James Keene, who was 44 and a landscape architect, who had the specific quality of paying attention that I recognized as the most important quality a person who would be with my daughter could have. She had told me about him in October of 2023 with a specific combination of caution and joy that people bring to things they want very much and are afraid to trust. He asks questions and waits for the answers. She had said, he doesn't already know what he thinks before I tell him. That's the one, I had said. Mom, she had said, that's what you want. That's what you deserve. She had looked at me for a moment. Then, I think so too. They were engaged by spring. The wedding was planned for June. In February, the Sunday of the honey jar, I was sitting in Diane's living room, and Derek, who had come to collect the last of his things and who had, for reasons I did not entirely understand, been permitted by Diane to spend the morning in the house, had found the jar in the pantry. I had retrieved the jar. I had put it in my sewing box, and I had begun to think about June. I was born in Chicago in 1956, the daughter of a watchmaker who had a small shop on Devon Avenue, and who taught me before I could read that the most important things require the closest attention, that the smallest mechanisms are the ones on which the largest things depend, and that the patience to work with small mechanisms is a form of respect for how the world is actually built. I had inherited the watchmaker's patience and the watchmaker's precision, and I had applied them after a detour through a fine arts program at the University of Illinois that had taught me the history and aesthetics of objects, to the study of objects, gemstones, which had always struck me as the intersection of the geological and the beautiful. The place where what the earth makes encounters what humans can do with what the earth makes. The GIA training was 2 years in the early 1980s, and it produced in me the credential and also the vocabulary, the specific technical language that allows gemologists to communicate precisely about what they are observing, which is a language of angles and percentages and color grades and clarity characteristics that can, in the hands of someone who also has the aesthetic training, describe something genuinely beautiful with the accuracy it deserves. I had worked in several contexts across my career. The assessment work, which was the core of what gemologists do, the evaluation and certification of stones for insurance, estate, or purchase purposes. The custom work, which involved consulting with clients on the design of jewelry that incorporated specific stones, or that needed to achieve specific aesthetic effects. And the teaching, which I had done informally across 35 years, and which produced in the students I had taught and the colleagues I had mentored the specific continuation of a discipline that requires transmission to persist. The rough diamond knowledge was the most specific of my areas of expertise. Rough diamonds, stones in their natural uncut state, are the domain of a specific subset of gemologists who have the training to evaluate a stone before the cutter has done the work of revealing what is inside it. The evaluation of rough requires the capacity to see through the stone surface, which is often cloudy or irregular or coated with mineral residue, to the interior, to assess what the stone contains and what it could become under the cutter's hands. This capacity takes years to develop and requires the specific combination of technical training and spatial imagination that makes any cutting and shaping discipline demanding. I had it. I had had it since the mid-1980s, when I had spent 6 months working with a diamond dealer in Antwerp who cut his own stones and who was willing to teach the evaluation process to someone who was willing to learn it. The 6 months in Antwerp had produced the skill and also the specific professional relationship with rough diamonds that meant when the Polish family stones came to me in 1996, I could assess them immediately and accurately. The 9 stones in the honey jar had been evaluated by me in 1996 and evaluated again in 2009 when I opened the jar for the first time to verify their condition, and evaluated again in my mind's eye on the Sunday in February when Derek had been in my mind's eye, on the Sunday in February when Derek had been stopped from pouring them down the drain. The evaluations were consistent. The collection was worth, in rough form, something in the range of $180,000 to $240,000, depending on the buyer and the market conditions at the time of sale. This was the uncut value. In cut form, once the work was done, the value would be different. Potentially significantly higher, potentially slightly lower, depending on the yield from each stone and the skill of the cutter and the quality of the finished gems. In jewelry form, the specific form I was thinking about as I held the jar up to the window light on the Sunday afternoon, the value would be different again, not higher or lower in any simple sense, but transformed. The value of a stone set by a skilled jeweler into a design piece is the value of the stone and the value of the work and the value of the design and the specific aesthetic achievement that the combination produces. It is not a financial value alone. It is what jewelry is, the material form of something that exists at the intersection of the beautiful and the valuable and the personal. I was thinking about a wedding in June. I was thinking about what a mother wears to her daughter's wedding when she has spent 35 years knowing how to make beautiful things and has been waiting for the occasion that warranted it. I went to Antwerp in March, not for long. I was on a cane and my hip was not fully recovered, but I could travel, and I had traveled before, and the specific destination was the right one. I had contacts in Antwerp from my 6 months there in the 1980s and from the decades of professional relationship that followed. And the contact I needed was a man named Bernard Clays, who had inherited his father's cutting workshop and who had, across 30 years of knowing me, become the person I trusted most in the world, with the work of transforming a rough stone into something finished. I did not take all 9 stones. I took 5. The 5 that had been in my evaluation, the clearest candidates for the specific design I had in mind. The other 4 I left in the honey jar, which I had rewrapped and placed in a padded envelope in my sewing box. The 4 remaining stones were security. If the design did not go exactly as planned, if the cutting produced less than the expected yield, if any stone turned out to be less than my assessment had suggested, there was a reserve. Bernard looked at the 5 stones for a long time without speaking, which is what Bernard does when he is looking at something he considers significant. Then he said, "These are from the family's estate." "A family's estate," I said. "The family is gone. The stones are mine." He looked at me over his glasses. "You have had these since the 90s, since 96, I said. "You were waiting," he said. "I was waiting for the occasion," I said. "I have an occasion." I told him about Diane's wedding. I told him what I wanted. Not in the technical language of a gemologist, but in the aesthetic language of someone who knows what she wants a thing to look like, and feel like, and be. A necklace, primarily with earrings that would coordinate, but not match in the way of matched sets, because matched sets are formal in a way that does not suit the occasion. The necklace to have a pendant of the largest stone, the one that I had been carrying in my mental image since 1996, as the central piece of whatever this collection was finally going to become. The earrings to be simpler, drops, each with one of the medium stones in a setting that allowed the stone to move. Bernard listened. He asked questions. The technical questions of a cutter who needs to understand the design before he can plan the cutting. The portion of the cut for the central stone, which would determine the finish on the settings, yellow, gold, or white, which I had already decided was yellow, because the family that had carried these stones had come from Eastern Europe in 1939, and yellow gold was the tradition of that time and that world, and I wanted the finished pieces to honor what they came from. He said he would need 6 weeks. I said I needed them by the last week of May. He said he would do it. I flew home. I told Diane I had been to see an old colleague about a project. She did not press me for details, which is consistent with Diane. She does not press for details about things she senses I will tell her when I am ready. I did not tell her about the honey jar. I had not told anyone about the honey jar in 27 years, and I was not going to tell anyone before June. Bernard Clays sent me photographs in April. 3 stages: the rough stones after cleaning, before cutting; the stones after the initial cleaving, when the interior structure becomes visible; and the stones after fasting, when the light begins to do what light does in a cut diamond, which is to behave in a way that nothing else that exists behaves. I looked at the photographs on my laptop in my room in Diane's house, with the sewing box on my desk and the honey jar, now containing 4 stones rather than 9, visible when I opened the box. The photographs were good because Bernard is meticulous, but photographs of diamonds are never the same as diamonds, and I held the anticipation of the finished pieces as a steady, warm presence in my thinking for the 6 weeks of Bernard's work. The central stone, the one I had carried in my mental image since 1996 as the pendant piece, had cut to a modified cushion, which Bernard had proposed based on the stone's internal structure, and which I had agreed to because Bernard has been cutting stones for 40 years, and his reading of a stone's natural direction is the reading of someone who works with the stone rather than against it. The yield was 2.3 carats, which was at the high end of what I had hoped for. The color, once cleaned and cut, and with the light moving through it, was a warm L in the Jaya color scale, which in a cushion cut with the right setting reads as champagne, as old gold, as the specific warmth of stones that are not trying to be colorless but that have their own color and are beautiful in it. I had wept a little when I saw the photograph, not from sentiment, or not entirely from sentiment, from the specific response of someone who has spent 35 years knowing that stones contain possibilities that are not yet visible, and who has been patient enough to wait for the visibility, and who is now looking at the visibility for the first time. Bernard sent the pieces in the last week of May. They arrived in a padded case with his certificate of work and a note that said, "Ruth, it has been my great pleasure. These stones deserved what was done with them. I hope the occasion is equal to the jewelry." I opened the case in my room. The necklace, a yellow gold setting, the cushion-cut central stone in a bezel of yellow gold that complemented the stone's warm color rather than fighting it, with a fine chain. That had the weight of something substantial. But the appearance of something substantial, but the appearance of something delicate. The pendant moved, not dramatically, but with the slight movement of a piece that has been designed to be worn rather than displayed. That exists for the person wearing it, rather than for the person looking at it. The earrings, 2 drops, each with a round cut stone. The 2 rounds from the remaining 4 rough stones, the ones whose natural shape had been most clearly suggesting a round, in yellow gold settings that echoed the pendant's bezel style. Long enough to move when she moved, simple enough to be worn with almost anything. I put the necklace on. I stood at the mirror in my room. I had not expected to be moved by looking at myself wearing the pieces. I had expected to assess the design, which I did. The design was correct. The proportions were right. The pendant sat exactly where I had intended it to sit. But beyond the assessment was something else. The specific experience of wearing something that has been 35 years in the making, that has traveled from Poland to Chicago, to Antwerp to Chicago, to a sewing box, and now to this mirror, and that to this mirror, is finally and exactly what it was supposed to become. I wore them for an hour in my room, alone. Then I put them back in the case, and I put the case in the sewing box, and I thought about June. June arrived with the specific quality of Chicago June, the warmth that is enthusiastic without being overwhelming, the lake light that gives the air its color in the morning, the roses that Diane had planted in the garden in the spring before the divorce, and that had, in the years since, grown with the energy of things that are finally in the right conditions. The wedding was at a garden venue in Lincoln Park, which James had chosen because gardens were his domain. He designed them, he understood them, and he had the specific feeling about the right place for a significant event that comes from spending event. A career thinking about how spaces work. The garden was perfect in the way that spaces are perfect when someone who understands spaces has arranged them. Diane was getting ready in the bridal suite, with her friends from work and her college roommate, and Diane's closest friend from before the first marriage, a woman named Caroline who had watched the 12 years with the same watching I had done. I went to the suite when the preparations were almost complete, when Diane was in the dress and her hair was done, and the specific transformation of a woman on her wedding day was complete except for whatever it was that was not yet complete. She looked at me when I came in. She looked at the sewing box I was carrying. "Sit down," I said. "I have something for you." She sat. Caroline moved to give me space, because Caroline understands when space is needed. I opened the sewing box. I lifted the velvet case. I opened the case. Diane looked at the jewelry. She did not speak immediately. She is her mother's daughter in certain specific ways, and one of them is the capacity to receive something extraordinary with the quiet that it deserves. Mom, she said finally. They are yours to wear today, I said. After today, they are yours. But today I want to put them on you. I put the necklace on her. The earrings on. I stepped back and I looked at my daughter in the June morning in her wedding dress, wearing the finished form of what a family had carried across a war, and what I had kept for 27 years in a jar of honey. What are these? She said. Not the financial question, the human one. What are they? Where do they come from? What is their meaning? I told her the story. The abbreviated version, the estate, the stones, the jar, the patient years. I did not tell her about the Sunday in February and Derek's hand over the sink, because today was not a day for that story. Today was for the stones and what they had become. A family carried these from Poland in 1939, she said. In a coat lining, I said, so they would look like they had nothing. She looked at the pendant in the mirror. And now, she said, now they are what they were always going to be. I said, when the time was right. She looked at me in the mirror. Her eyes were the eyes of a woman who understands something, who has put pieces together that she had not previously seen as a set. Ooh, honey jar, she said. Yes, I said. Derek almost. Yes, I said. But you got it back. I got it back, I said. I'm faster on my feet than people expect. She laughed. The specific laugh of Diane when something is both genuinely funny and genuinely something else simultaneously. The laugh that has been more present in the months since the divorce than in the years before it. I straightened the necklace. I stepped back. You look magnificent, I said. She looked at herself in the mirror, at the dress and the jewelry and the June light. I do, she said. She said it simply, without the deflection that used to accompany her self-assessments, the qualifications and the uncertainties that 12 years had installed. She looked at herself and she said, I do. And she meant both things the phrase could mean. On a wedding day, which is the specific gift of a wedding morning when everything aligns. The ceremony was in the garden at 11. James's family on one side, Diane's friends and family on the other. The flowers arranged by James himself, because he is a man who does things himself when the things matter. Caroline was Diane's witness. James's brother was his. The officiant was a woman who had known Diane from the neighborhood, and who had the specific quality of someone who knows the people she is marrying, and who allows that knowledge to inform the ceremony rather than performing something generic over two people she has just met. I sat in the front row. I wore the other 3 earrings from Bernard, the ones I had kept for myself, the 3 remaining round cuts set in simple studs, yellow gold, because I had saved the finest stones for Diane's necklace and earrings, and these were good stones in earrings, and these were good stones in simpler settings, and they were mine, and this was the occasion for mine as well. Derek was not there. He had not been invited, which was correct, and his absence was one of the specific qualities of a wedding that is exactly right. The sense of everything that is present being what should be present, and everything that is absent being what should be present. Absent, I am told, by Caroline, who maintains contact with several people who maintain contact with Derek, that Derek had seen photographs from the wedding. The specific photographs that circulated in the social media of people who knew Diane, the photographs that showed the garden and the dress and the man who had arranged the flowers, and the photographs that showed Diane's mother in the front row, wearing 3 diamonds in yellow gold studs, and the photographs that showed Diane herself, the necklace and the earrings catching the June light in the way that yellow gold and warm diamonds catch light. I am told that Derek had looked at these photographs with the specific quality of looking that Derek applies to things he wishes he had not dismissed too quickly. I do not know this directly, I know it from Caroline, who is a reliable observer. I do not spend time thinking about what Derek experienced when he saw the photographs, because Derek is not my concern, and has not been since the divorce was final. What I observed from the front row was this. James Keene stood at the end of the garden aisle, and he watched Diane walk toward him with the specific quality of someone who is seeing something he values and who is not managing his response to it. He was not performing the emotion of the moment. He was having it. His face had the openness of a person who is paying full attention to what is in front of him, and who finds what is in front of him entirely worth the full attention. This is what I meant when I said he was the one. The ceremony included a moment. Not traditional, something that the officiant had suggested and that Diane and James had agreed to, in which each of them spoke a few words about the other. Not vows exactly, not the traditional form, just the specific things they wanted to say, in their own words, about who the other person was. James said, "Diane taught me what it looks like when someone stops hiding. I met her when she was in the middle of learning that she didn't have to. I have watched her stop hiding for 2 years, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure she never needs to again." Diane said. James asks questions and waits for the answers. I didn't understand for a long time how extraordinary this was. I understand now. I want to spend the rest of my life being asked about and answered for by someone who does not already know what he thinks before I tell him. I looked at my daughter wearing the diamonds that a family had carried across a war. I thought about the coat lining, about the grandmother who had sewn them in and survived, about the daughter who had brought them to Chicago and who had wanted them kept, about the jar, the honey, the 27 years of patience, about Derek's hand over the sink, about June and the garden and the man at the end of the aisle whose face had the openness of someone who sees. The reception was in the garden venue's indoor space, which had the tall windows and the light that June interiors have when the architecture is right. I was seated at a table with Caroline and 2 of James's family members, a comfortable arrangement that allowed me the specific pleasure of a significant occasion without the social obligation of performing the mother of the bride in a high-energy way. I wore the earrings throughout. The 3 studs, small and simple, yellow gold. People noticed them. Several people noticed them, which is the specific thing that happens when jewelry is what it is rather than what it is claimed to be. One of James's aunts, a woman of my age with the evident aesthetic sensibility of someone who has spent a life looking at things carefully, came to my table during the cocktail hour and said, "Your earrings are extraordinary. May I ask about the stones?" We talked for 20 minutes. She had some knowledge of gemstones. Not professional, but the considered knowledge of someone who has engaged with jewelry seriously as a collector over many years. She understood what she was being told when I described the stones as rough diamonds that had been cut by a craftsman in Antwerp. She understood the provenance as I described it. Not the full provenance, but enough. Old stones from a family, kept long and crafted late, worn for the first time at the right occasion. "The piece on your daughter," she said. "The same collection," I said, "the largest stone." She looked at Diane across the room, where Diane and James were talking to a group of friends and where the pendant was visible against the dress. "It's magnificent," she said. "It's magnificent," she said. "Both the stone and the woman wearing it." "Yes," I said, "both." Caroline came to sit beside me at a quieter moment in the afternoon, when the formal events were done and the dancing was beginning, and the room had settled into the specific ease of a good reception in its later hours. "You look like the most satisfied woman in this room," she said. "I might be," I said. "The jewelry," she said. "I've been watching people notice it all day. They can't quite identify why it's different from other jewelry, but they know it's different. It is different, I said. Because of where it came from, she said. Because of everything, I said. Where it came from, and how long it waited, and what it became, and what it's for. Jewelry is always a story. This one is a longer story than most, she looked at me. The honey jar, she said. She had heard from Diane some version of the morning in February. The honey jar, I agreed. He almost poured it down the sink, she said. He did almost pour it down the sink, I said. And now his ex-wife is at her wedding wearing the diamonds he almost poured down the sink, she said. Yes, I said. It deserved thought rather than a quick answer. I feel, I said, that the stones are exactly where they should be, which is on my daughter at her wedding on a June day that is exactly right. Derek is irrelevant to the feeling. He was never the point. Who was the point? Caroline said. The stones, I said. The woman who carried them from Poland, the daughter who wanted them kept, Diane. The moment when everything that has been waiting is in the right place at the right time. And you, Caroline said. And me, I agreed. A little, I am part of the story. A large part, she said. A patient part, I said. Patience is different from large. I want to tell you about the 4 remaining stones. The 4 that I had left in the honey jar when I took 5 to Antwerp, because they are part of the full accounting. After the wedding in the quiet of the summer, I did something that I had been thinking about since long before June. I went back to the honey jar and I removed the 4 stones and I cleaned them. Not cut them, just clean the honey from their surfaces in warm water, which is the safe way to clean rough diamonds. And I looked at them for a long time. They were, collectively, worth something real. Not as much as the 5 I had taken to Antwerp. The 5 had included the 2 finest specimens, but real. I had been considering what to do with them since the spring, and the consideration had produced a conclusion. I called the Chicago History Museum. I told the curator what I had, the stones, the provenance, the family history as best I understood it, the documentation from the 1996 estate assessment. He listened with the specific attention of someone who is hearing a story that is significant. He said, we would need the documentation to verify the provenance claim. I said I had the documentation. He said, can we meet? We met. I brought the 4 stones and the 1996 assessment report and the notes I had kept across the years. The curator brought a colleague from the museum's Eastern European Heritage Program, a woman named Dr. Kowalski, who had spent her career documenting the material culture of Polish Jewish immigrant families in Chicago. Dr. Kowalski looked at the stones. She looked at the assessment report. She said, the family name is in the estate records? Yes, I said, Lederman. She looked at me. There is a Lederman family in our records, a family that came from Krakow in 1939. We have oral history materials from a nephew who was interviewed in the 1970s. He mentioned that the family had brought valuables. He didn't know what specifically. These specifically, I said, or some of them. The family brought 9 stones. The woman who kept them gave me the collection to keep safely. She died in 1997. She had no heirs. And you kept them, Dr. Kowalski said. I kept them, I said. I kept them? I said. I used 5 of them for a purpose I believe the original owner would have approved of. These 4 I want to donate to the museum with the provenance documentation for research and commemoration of what families carried. The museum accepted the donation. The 4 stones are now in the museum's collection, with the documentation that identifies them as material evidence of the Lederman family's survival and flight. The museum's Eastern European Heritage Program has used them as an anchor for a broader exhibition about what families carried from Europe in the 1930s and 1940s, and the exhibition has been visited by thousands of people, including several individuals who contacted the museum after seeing the exhibition because they believed their own families had known the Lettermans. The exhibition includes a photograph of the necklace that Bernard made. Not the necklace itself, which is Diane's, but a photograph of it, with a description of what the stones were and where they came from. The label says, 5 diamonds from the Letterman collection, crafted into jewelry by a Brussels gemologist in 2024, worn by the daughter of the gemologist who kept them safe for 27 years at a wedding in Chicago in June 24. I stand in front of this label sometimes when I visit the exhibition. I find it a good way to spend an afternoon. Diane and James moved into the house on Lincoln Square that James had owned for 12 years, and that he had been living in alone. The house had a large garden, which was of course not an accident. James had designed the garden himself across the 12 years, and the garden was what you would expect from a landscape architect who is good at his work and who has had 12 years to make something exactly right. She called me every Sunday from the new house, and the calls had a different quality from the calls of the previous 2 years of the divorce, and from the years of the marriage before that. The calls had the quality of a person who is talking from a place of rest rather than from a place of managed stability. The difference is not always visible from the outside. Both rest and managed stability can produce pleasant Sunday calls with your mother. But I have been talking to Diane on the phone for 41 years, and I know the difference, the specific texture of a conversation with a person who is at ease rather than managing. She wore the necklace to a dinner in September that she and James hosted for their families. The blending of families, the specific occasion of a second marriage that requires the people in each person's orbit to become familiar with the people in the other person's orbit. I was there. James's aunt, the woman who'd admired the earrings at the wedding, was there. It was a pleasant evening with the specific warmth of an occasion that does not have any stakes attached to it, except the ordinary stakes of people being present to each other. James's aunt said to me during the dinner, "I've been thinking about the stones since the wedding. The provenance you described. A family that carried them from Poland." "Yes," I said. "And you kept them for how long?" she said. 27 years, I said. "Because the moment had to be right," she said. "Because the moment had to be right," I agreed. She looked at the necklace on Diane. "I think the moment was right," she said. "Yes," I said. "I think so too." Diane found her way back to work, not the administrative work she had been doing in the years of the marriage, which had been organized around Derek's schedule, Derek's priorities, but the research position she had left when Mira was born, and to which she returned with the specific energy of a 41-year-old who has been thinking about this for a decade and who has finally cleared the space to do it. She is a child development researcher. The work she is doing now is work she was doing before she was derailed by the specific derailment that unhappy marriages produce. And she brings to it the additional understanding of a woman who has spent a decade living what she studies. Derek, I am told, has had a difficult year. Not catastrophically. He is not a man who falls apart. He is a man who manages. And managing is what he is doing. But the photographs from the wedding, Caroline has told me, and the exhibition at the museum, which someone in Derek's orbit visited and mentioned to someone else in Derek's orbit, have produced in him a specific quality of awareness of what he almost poured down a drain on a Sunday morning in February. I do not spend time thinking about Derek's awareness. I think about the honey jar, which I have cleaned and which sits on my windowsill now, as a mason jar, with nothing in it, the amber glass, the old lid, the label in my handwriting that says Wildflower Honey, 2001, do not use. The honey has been washed out. The label remains. The jar is empty and beautiful, and it sits in the window light in the mornings with the specific quality of a thing that has served its purpose. And that remains because it is part of the story. I am 68 years old now. The hip has healed to its current level, which is functional and not entirely without pain. And I have the cane when I need it and do not have it when I don't. I have moved from Diane's house, which was the right thing while it was the right thing, and which became the right thing to move from. When Diane found her feet into a small apartment on the north side of the city that has a view of the lake and Dane, that has, in the kitchen, the shelf where I put the things that don't go anywhere else. The honey jar is on the shelf. The sewing box is on the desk. The remaining rough diamonds. There are 9 rough diamonds. There are none. I donated all 4. What is in the sewing box now is sewing equipment, which is what sewing boxes are for. Diane has the necklace. She wears it on significant occasions and sometimes on ordinary ones. Last spring, she wore it to a symposium she was presenting at because she decided, she told me, that the right pieces should be worn often and not saved. She is correct about this, and I told her so. What do I know? At 68, after the honey jar and the diamonds, and June and the museum and the year that followed, I know that patience is not the same as waiting. Waiting is passive. It is the absence of action. Patience is active. It is the sustained assessment of whether the moment has arrived, which requires continuous attention and the specific expertise required to recognize the moment when it comes. I was not waiting for June for 27 years. I was assessing, year by year, whether the conditions were right for what the stones could become. Order. Keeping things done correctly is the recognition that certain things require time to become what they are, that the stone in rough form contains a finished gem that cannot yet be seen, that the person in difficulty contains a capacity that has not yet had the conditions to express itself, that the moment that is almost right is not the same as the moment that is right, and that the difference between the two is the whole of the thing. I know that Derek was looking at a jar of old honey when he almost poured it down the drain, and that what was in the jar was not what it appeared to be, and that this is one of the most consistent facts about the world that I have encountered across 68 years of living in it. Things that look like nothing. The skill is in knowing which is which, and the knowing takes the specific combination of training and attention and patience that produces the capacity to see through surfaces to the substance beneath. I know that a family that carried stones from Poland in a coat lining in 1939 was doing the most human possible thing, preserving value against a time when the preservation would be necessary, holding what could be held, carrying what could be held, carrying what could be held, carrying what could be carried. The stones I wore to Diane's wedding were the physical continuation of that act of preservation, translated across 85 years in a continent and a language and 2 generations into something that a woman wore on her second wedding day in a garden in Lincoln Park in June. The grandmother who sewed the coat lining would not have been surprised by any of this. She had understood, in the way of people who have lived through the worst that history can produce, that things which are kept correctly and carried faithfully arrive eventually at their moment. She sewed the diamonds into the coat because she believed they would arrive somewhere, somehow, in some form, at the right time. She was right. My name is Ruth Miriam Goldstein Auerbach. I am 68 years old. I was a gemologist for 35 years, and I kept 9 rough diamonds in a jar of honey for 27 years. And I wore 5 of them to my daughter's wedding in June, and I donated 4 of them to a museum where they tell the story of a family that carried them from Poland to Chicago in 1939. Derek almost poured them down the drain. I am faster on my feet than people expect. The honey jar is on my shelf. The lake is visible from my window. Diane calls on Sunday. Everything that was kept is now where it should be. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is everything.